For giving way, and I too welcome the fact that the Backbench Business Committee have found time for this debate. But would you not agree with me that an issue like defence should not be a matter for the Backbench Business Committee? It should be a matter for Her Majesty's government. This should be a debate in government time, not a Backbench Business Committee time.
Well, I would hope, actually, that it could be debated both in backbench time and in government time because of its central importance. But as the Backbench Business Committee will see, there is heavy pressure on the ability to speak this afternoon, so that there is a time limit, even though there is going to be no vote at the end, and therefore it means, I hope, that we will have further such debates.
Right on, friend, getting away. Would he not agree with me, or think back with nostalgia perhaps, to the days when we had 3 at least annual debates on defence matters in government, on government motion, in government time in this House? Is it not right that it should be a government debate today rather than a backbench one?
My honourable friend will know that the government has taken a decision to give over a large slug of parliamentary time to the Backbench Committee to allocate according to the priorities that backbenchers identify. I think that was a bold decision for a government to take, and the result today is that we have that defence debate. And I hope the Backbench Committee will note, as my right honourable friend said, the strong attendance, and that will mean that we see more defence debates on Thursday afternoons in the future. I'm delighted also, Mr Deputy Speaker, to have the opportunity to address the House. I've said that once, so I won't say it again.
James Gray.
Mr Speaker, I will not dwell, if I may be forgiven, on the Honourable Gentleman for Barrow and Furness' very welcome recommitment to the independent nuclear deterrent, which I know that my honourable friend for New Forest West will very much welcome, if not his right honourable friend for Newcastle, nonetheless, who looked perfectly benign during his speech, you'll be pleased to hear. If I may, however, I'd like to focus, if I may, on more general topics. I was very struck and impressed by the speech of my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Defence, a few moments ago. He has been dealt an extraordinarily difficult hand in the sense that he came into government, he discovered a £38 billion black hole in the defence budget, and, of course, he was required by his right honourable friend, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of Exchequer, to make Defence's contribution towards balancing the books. But it seems to me, Mr Deputy Speaker, if I may, that the purpose in today's debate is not to consider those great national issues of balancing the books and dealing with the deficit left to us by the previous government. That's a matter for other times and for other people, a higher position than mine. It seems to me that our position in this debate ought to be that very much exemplified by my honourable friend, the member for Gainsborough, to consider whether or not what we are currently doing is the right thing to do in terms of defence of the realm. Now, if it's not, then, of course, the Chancellor of Exchequer and the Prime Minister and others at a higher pay grade than mine will have to explain why it is that they are nonetheless doing what's the wrong thing from the point of view of defence of the realm. But I think we should cast to one side economic constraints, if you will. I hope I'm not being either naive or difficult in doing that. Cast to one side economic constraints and instead focus on what we should be doing with regard to defence of the realm. Now, I had the very good fortune to be chosen and asked to serve on the Policy Review Group, which went before the last general election. I was the MP on it. It was chaired by the noble Baroness Neville Rolfe, and produced this very weighty document, An Unquiet World, a submission to the Shadow Cabinet. And this is the document on which our manifesto was then based. And I quote from it, if I may. She said in page 8, capability needs to be reassessed. An incoming Conservative government should conduct a defence review not with the aim of inflicting further cuts, but of ensuring that our armed forces have been asked to do the right job, are properly equipped and trained, and are employed in the right terms and conditions. And again, another place in the report, she says that defence reviews tend to strike dread in the hearts of those involved or affected because of the likelihood of there being cuts under them. This is not a necessary outcome and not one this policy group would wish to see. In other words, the policy group in which I served and which informed the manifesto of my party said that they took the view that there should be a defence review, but that should not involve necessarily defence cuts. Now, the reality, of course, which we've seen and which the Secretary of State laid out very plainly in his speech, reminded me rather of the speech of a chairman of a multinational company explaining to shareholders that things weren't all that great, but that he would have to make some cuts in the company, but he very much hoped that in the years to come dividends would once again start to be paid at some stage in the future. So an accountant's speech rather than a defence speech. I don't blame him for that, that's his job, but nonetheless I think I have the great luxury of being a backbencher, I have the great luxury of being the chairman of the all-party group for the armed forces, and therefore feel it right to be able to speak up for the armed forces, even if that were to upset my own front bench. Not something I'd ever seek to do, and I know my own friend would agree with that. Now, it seems to me that the first thing I should say about that is the only uncertainty in the defence world is uncertainty. We never know what is going to happen next. Who would have predicted the Falklands? Who would have predicted Saddam's invasion of Kuwait? Who would have predicted 9/11 or 7/7? Who would have thought that we were simultaneously fighting two wars, and very recently fighting two wars, one in Afghanistan, of course, and one in Iraq? Who would have predicted Libya, Kosovo, the Balkans, Syria? None of these are even remotely predictable, nor, of course, was the Second World War, nor the First World War, sparked off by the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand at Sarajevo. Unpredictability is the absolute absolutely highest thing, the highest certainty that there is in defence is uncertainty. Now, I think, and against that background of uncertainty, what we're facing today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Iran, who knows what they're doing? Within weeks we could see further activity from the Iranians. There's a threat to the blockage of the Straits of Hormuz. Israel is threatening preemptive nuclear potentially action against them. The whole Palestinian question remains unanswered. Syria, of course, is in turmoil. Egypt, we have no idea what's going to happen despite the lifting of the state of emergency. Pakistan is on the brink of collapse. Libya, we don't know what's really going on. It's certainly a bit of a vacuum there. Afghanistan, uncertain. And, of course, Iraq close to meltdown. We are facing an incredibly dangerous and uncertain world at this stage, and we should be preparing our defences for that uncertainty. So what are we actually doing? I very much regret to have to say that my great party, and I think the honourable gentleman opposite was right when he said that Labour tends to spend more on defence, the Conservative Party tends to spend less. I'm afraid that is actually historic accuracy. My great party, I very much regret to say, are announcing an army which is the smallest army since the Crimea War. There are those who say the definition of the word army means 100,000 soldiers. It is arguable, depending on how you use the words, it is arguable that when that occurs, Great Britain will no longer have an army. We'll have a defence force rather than an army. And I, as a backbencher, unlaboured by great considerations of state, I'm able to say that I think that is an absolutely disgraceful situation. And it's a disgraceful situation when faced by the uncertainty that we are today facing. The RAF is cut in half, the Royal Navy is emasculated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is my view that we do not have the capability in this country to do the things that we've always done. Now, I wonder why that should be. And maybe I could quote in support a previous Prime Minister, should be nameless, who said to me, I went to see the teachers and they told me to get lost. And I went to see the doctors and nurses and they told me to get lost. And I went to see the generals and they turned to the right, saluted and marched off and said, whatever you say, Prime Minister, I'll happily carry that out. Now that, of course, is precisely what is happening here. Our armed forces will say that whatever the task set to them, they will do it. They'll find a way to do it. They are a can-do sort of organisation. But should we actually ask them to do it? In these dusty Thursday afternoon debates that we had throughout the last 15 years that I've been in this place, we talked about overstretch. We talked about the fact that we were not able to carry out our duties as armed forces. We blamed the Labour government for it. I now find myself speaking from the backbenches on the Conservative side of the House, making precisely the same arguments as I did for the last 15 years. I do not believe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that given the cuts that we're now facing, that we will be able to carry out our moral duty to lead the world, to intervene for good around the world. I believe that we are hampering ourselves from doing that. And I suspect that actually defence spending and defence budgets should, for that very reason, be separate from schools and hospitals and other parts of the national budget, because we have a duty, a moral duty, to be doing things in the world that we should not allow our defence, our economic situation to prevent us from doing. I therefore very much regret to have to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I am at odds with my own party on this great subject. I believe that we should find a way to maintain our defence spending at a level where we indeed as a nation can punch above our weight.